Hello, my name is Bob Ganzak, and this is Motivation U, the podcast. Welcome to Motivation U, the podcast. My name is Bob Ganzak, and with me today is Matt Thompson, performance consultant for Dale Carnegie Training. And we're coming to you live from a variety of places today. I'm at the home office here in Valdosta, Georgia. Jared is our producer, is at Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, exit 384 off I-75 in Celebration Point. He's inside the coach's podcast room where we do our program every single week. And then Matt Thompson, I believe he's coming to us live from the Jacksonville area, if I'm not mistaken, or it could be someplace different. Where are you today, Matt?
So actually, I'm in Brantford right now.
Awesome.
Jacksonville this morning and swung over to Brantford today.
That is great. That is great. Today we're discussing leadership programs that Dale Carnegie has available. There's a lot of different programs that people can enroll in, and you can enroll in all of these programs online or in person. And that's one of the really cool things. But today, what I'd like to do, Matt, is for you and I just to have a discussion about a lot of the questions that we hear. Where should people go to find a leadership program? And, what defines a leadership program? The reason I say that is over the last couple of weeks, I've gotten a lot of questions in a lot of the meetings that I've been involved in where people are looking for a specific program, they think. And then when you start getting into the details of what they need, not what we have, but what they need, you tend to go in a different direction. Do you find that so far in what you've been doing?
I do. I find that a lot of people, the first thing they say is that we need a public speaking or communications program. Mm-hmm. And then as we're talking, we find out that that is part of it, but really what they need is they need to understand leadership and how to develop leaders and understanding the difference between being a leader and being somebody in a high position.
Mm-hmm. I had a great meeting, a series of meetings over the last couple of weeks with one company. And when they had initiated these meetings pre-COVID. And because of certain situations that happened in 2020, 2021, and then 2022, some of the things that went on within their organizations, acquiring more companies, buying up smaller organizations and bringing them inside, they weren't able to get that training going. When the gentleman and I started talking, he was looking at what they were discussing back in 2019 with a former person that worked with us, and they were looking at sales training. And as I went through like an hour and 45 minutes conversation with him, and I asked him, I said, why are you looking at sales training? You have an incredible sales machine, a great template that you could even reproduce and take to other parts of the world for your company. Why would you want to change that? And there was a question that we figured it was what he was looking for was leadership. And so we went towards that direction. So sometimes we don't, like you said, Matt, we don't know exactly where we're going when we're trying to purchase training, you know, when we're up front. I remember when, I can still remember, even though it's many years ago, 31 years ago, when I first started looking at finding training for myself. I had just been named general manager of a radio station, and I kind of didn't have a clue of what I was doing. As far I knew sales pretty good, and I could manage a sales team, but now I was being introduced to other mentalities, and I was so fortunate. I mean, I looked at a plethora of training programs that were available back in that time. And the one I settled on was the Dale Carnegie course, a 14-week, communication and human relations program, which really changed my world because it gave me a foundation to leadership. Now, you recently went through the 8-week version a couple of years ago.
Right.
What shifts did you see in your leadership mentality after you went through the Skills for Success?
So what I noticed was it went from worrying about me and what was going on with me to worrying about my people and how I was communicating with them. And I found that the most important thing was that I had the power to change the communication just by simply changing the way I communicated. And it took a little time after, of applying the principles, but it has really changed who I am as a leader.
Yeah, that's one of those things that are vitally important, and that I found too is, it was tough going from a salesperson to a sales manager, because that salesperson, I don't want to talk down about salespeople. I mean, absolutely never. Yet we're kind of wrapped up into our own world. And that world should be consisted of taking care of your customer, taking care of the company, but also being focused on what you need to do. And then when you go to a sales manager, you have to shed that. Part of that leadership thing is, and we're going to talk about that, develop your leadership potential, stop doing and start leading. When you go to that sales managers, all of a sudden your focus has to be on 7, 8, or 10 people that, you have to put your faith and trust and efforts and energy into them. And it's less about you. That's what the Skills for Success Dale Carnegie course helped me with so much. Those first 9 principles, learning all about what we need to do differently to build that rapport with our team. And that was really a key. And then when it opened my doors to that, hey, there might be a different mentality in the office personnel or programming personnel or, talent, engineering. Wow. Yeah. Amazing. And when you were with West Fraser, you ran into the same thing in the lumber industry. Different people in different areas.
Well, the big thing for me was I came from a company where I was in a position of power. I was a maintenance manager, right? So I was the head of a department. The department basically ran the way that I wanted it to when I wanted it to. And then I went from there to a position of influence. And that's a hard shift to make. And then still with the expectation that I'm going to be able to change the way that several different mills are doing things. So what the class did for me was it taught me how to be able to speak to them in a way of, instead of, okay, here's what we're doing, to ask those questions and say, hey, what can we do better? How can we do it? Let it be their idea. Things that I had done before, but when you're in a position of power and the power ultimately rests on you, there are times that you take that command and control and say, this is what we're doing. I don't have that. I didn't have that at all. So I had actually spoken to a VP in our company and said, if corporate would give these directives, it'd be so much easier for me to do what I got to do. And he says, I'm going to challenge you to do it now, just with influence. And I'll say that was tough, but the class really helped me be able to do that and to work through it.
That's fascinating when you start looking at it. Let's jump into some of the products that Dale Carnegie um, offers in the leadership world. And just before we went live on the program, you had mentioned some other programs, one being the Skills for Success. And I hadn't planned to talk about that class today, but we're going to. Before we finish, I want to get to that because that's a great leadership foundational program. The first one I have up here is developing your leadership potential. That's stop doing and start leading, which is that first time leadership role. What are some of the things that you took out of that? You have not experienced that program. I went through the program and then went through it to become an instructor in the program. And this all happened during COVID, which was awesome and a little bit pre-COVID. But what do you take from that program when you look at the content within it?
So two things. The first thing I took from it, which really spoke to me, was, the program talks about accountability, but it doesn't talk about discipline. And a lot of places I've been, those two things are tied together. So it was really great to see a program that has that path of accountability without just, that hard line discipline all the time.
Mm.
A lot of it was, I noticed from coming from a technician, I was an electrician and a process technician, all these things, into a leadership role. There were days that I just went, let me just go do it. It'll get done faster. I know I can get it done. And then it took me a while to realize that the people who worked for me at that time were the ones sitting in the trucks and I was out there doing things, so this sparked in me a memory of that okay, there are a lot of leaders out there that don't understand the difference between, leading and doing. You want to show somebody, but you really want them to take the authority for it. You're giving your authority away to them. And so there was some really great reading when I started going through the class.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept on that. When I look at it, that just the words performance change pathway,
Mm-hmm.
That you start right out in that world in the program. Mentally, in my mind, that tells me that I'm making a mental shift, a task shift from where I was to what I need to be now into this new position. And it's an interesting leadership journey. One of the things that we do is, we want to find out who influenced your leadership along the way. When you were a child, what did your parents teach you about leadership? What did they, what was their opinion? Your first boss, in school, what did you learn about leadership? And just seeing that journey that we go on is amazing. So if we were to look at that with you, Matt, I mean, in your world, what are some of the things that, think as a young child, what did you learn about leadership over the years? And what was that journey like mentally? And what was some aha moments?
So for me, I was lucky. My dad is a phenomenal leader. He taught me from a young age about loving your people, and that they're a part of the family. As soon as somebody's on your team, they're in your heart, they're in your family. So I've seen him not only speak of that, but live it his entire career. So I came into leadership with that mentality, and I had to hone it. I mean, seeing it and doing it are two different things. We had a lot of influence from people, my dad was in sales for the first, when I was younger. So we had a lot of influence from people like Zig Ziglar and stuff like that, and understanding motivation from that end of it. And then he went from sales to heavy industry. So I've got to see him move through the progression of starting all over again when I was younger, being on his tools all the way up through now being a high ranking manager in a company. And it has just been, it was phenomenal for me to watch. But now that I've taken that same path, I understand it so much better. Like I'd never realized how hard it is when you're a leader and a manager and all these things to balance that home life, with that work life and to not bring those things home, and I think of the times that when he would come home and you could see there was something wrong, and you instantly think, oh, it's me, because you're a kid and you don't understand that it's the world around you. So all of those things, made me who I was when I got into leadership. And that I'm one of those lifelong learners. I'm constantly reading something or watching something or taking some kind of course. And it is taken me to where I am now. And that now that I'm in the Dale Carnegie world, I'm in one course. I had my first class last night for one of the live online courses, and it just to be able to see the progression for me from when I got into like where I'm at now at West Fraser to where I am now, just from the Dale Carnegie course after everything else that I've done. It's from other people that I hear that I've changed, and I had to recognize it. That's one thing that I saw with this Stop Doing and Start Learning was that increased self-awareness.
Mhm.
That's tough. It's tough to look at ourselves.
Yeah,
You know,
that's identifying your own strength, competency. That's difficult.
it is. It is, and sometimes it's more difficult to see the strengths than it is the weaknesses. So yeah, go ahead.
Matt, something that you know you've seen it because you've been in a graduate assistant course coach with me in classes. But what I love is when a spouse or a child or a parent comes to graduation. I think of Quade Jacks.
Hmm.
And I asked his mother, who came to what have you seen a change in? And I remember she said two things. Uh, Much more upbeat, you know, more energy. And the second thing was she pointed to her husband, Quade's dad, and said, I wish he would take it. uh, which, I love asking that question to people who are closest to that individual after they graduate, because it's like, aha moments. I remember somebody that we get to work with a lot, Talia Milan, when she came to graduation for her dad, Orlando, and I asked her, what did you, and she was just like, wow, wow. She was just totally open about, all of the things that she had seen her dad accomplish in those 8 weeks. So, and it's also cool that you mentioned Zig Ziglar, because his path is similar to the path that you and I are on. He went through the Dale Carnegie world. If I'm not mistaken, he may have also been a Dale Carnegie instructor at one time before he went on into his own business. But he's a graduate and went through that. That's why you see a lot of similarities in what Zig's son now carries on after his dad passed away. What his son carries on in their company has a lot of similarities to Carnegie. Another thing about the developing your leadership, what is it that is with the words honesty and integrity through all of the programs of Carnegie? I mean, why do we have to say that? Isn't that a given?
I think that sometimes, especially in leadership, it can be fragile, right? Because as a leader, we are worried about our people 100%. We also have to worry about ourselves. And there's honesty and integrity, not only in making sure that we're honest about the things that we do, but that our people do, and taking ownership of that, and taking accountability for that as a leader, as an employee, so it's always in the forefront of our mind to say, what, okay, this person who works for me, I love them. They're a great person. I know they have this in their life and that's going on and they're doing this. when something happens, we have to still be honest about, okay, we have to hold accountability where accountability is due, so there's that side of it, and I think that honesty and integrity are those things that we think are absolutes, but really mean different things to different people. So it's important that in these classes, we get people to understand what we mean by honesty and integrity, doing the right thing, all the time when people are there watching or not. So, and it's always funny how all of these tie together. If you look at the catalog of the classes that are available, they all tie together so beautifully. I mean, it's just like this beautiful path.
Mhm.
And I really,
It is really a leadership journey
it is.
when you look at it. Yeah, there's something you've mentioned a couple times, and that's accountability. When I think of individuals that I promoted to new positions, I think that may be one of the toughest parts of going from a peer to a supervisor or leader, is holding the people that you used to be a part of accountable. Now, two reasons. One is some people, as we heard in one of our last Skills for Success classes, when we talked about leadership, the young man said, I always thought leadership was telling people what they have to do. So there's two things that go on in accountability. The person that finds it difficult to even approach accountability with the people they used to work with, and the people that now feel they're superior to the people that it used to work, and then overdo holding people accountable.
Right.
Finding that blend is so important. So
It is.
important.
It is. And a lot of leaders that I've come across through the years that are that authoritarian and want to hold everybody accountable, they from what I've seen are the ones that are not introspective, right? Or that tend to not be introspective. They're the ones that tend to you do this, you do this, you do this, and when it's not right, well, you did it. That's why things like classes like this are so important, to get people to kind of break that shell. I always love to say in these classes that I can watch with somebody. I've seen it with myself. I call it that crack. When that shell around you cracks and you learn something new, they've got to have that crack in order to let this new portion of them, come out. And it's more so for the people that work for them, right? But also part of it is, if you have a leader who is telling you day after day exactly what to do, and that leader's not there, it's not going to get done. Right. So because, I wasn't told to do it. If you are the type of leader that can actually lead, and you have your people to where they take that accountability, they take that ownership, right? And you're doing it more with the influence than authority. When you're not there, it's going to get done because they do it for them.
Yeah. We're talking leadership programs through Dale Carnegie with Matt Thompson of Dale Carnegie Training, and discussing, really these programs. Matt, there's something that I've never shared with you that we learn as instructors when we go through our training, and I probably don't mention this enough, and I've seen it in the class that we're going through right now, and that is the fact that Mr. Carnegie always looked upon a class not as if you're teaching that class, but if you're going through the class with them. And that's, I learn a lot from the students, the people that are participating in the room, and I try to mentally go through the program with them. And that's why sometimes, we get questions, like we got a question from a lady in class the other night that, we don't always go by the perfect line that's in the Evolve system. And that's because I'm on a journey too, and something might come up in the room where I might take a different path because of data or information or energy that has come into the room. And that's I believe that's unique to what we do. and it's part of the methodology that we learn in delivering these programs. One thing last thing I want to mention on the develop your leadership potential, and you'll find it in a lot of our leadership programs, is a tool called the interview. Now, that's not interview. You're not interviewing somebody, the interview. And that is when you sit down with somebody, that you've been working with, and you really find out about that person. And that's such a valuable tool in leadership. Is a lot of times when we come into leadership, we want to lead from this view, and we've got to lead from that view, theirs, what's out there. And in the book, Good to Great, there's a wonderful analogy that Jim Collins gives in there, and that, when something goes wrong, you've got to think of looking in the mirror. And when things are going well, you want to think of looking out the window, focusing on yourself. What could I have done different when things go wrong? And when things are going well, let's look out the window and applaud all of the individuals that make it happen. That's a difficult thing to become when you go from being a team player and all of a sudden you're elevated to this leadership role. You want to, pound your chest and say, I made it and everything else. How do you make that transition?
It's tough. I always tell the leaders that are under me, the frontline leaders, that just remember that it is, we did a great job. I messed up, and when we have an issue that we're having to deal with an employee, I like to ask, so what was that employee chasing? Because they're chasing something. They're not doing it just to do it. They're chasing something. How did they have access to either the system or whatever it was that they got into? And then why did they think it was okay? If you can answer those three, you're 9 times out of 10, I find that it is a breakdown in process over people. So that if we're able to put things in place that are necessary, then the accountability, when it does happen, when you have somebody who just, throws all caution to the wind and does something they're absolutely not supposed to, then you can feel better knowing that accountability is laying in the right spot, that it's not something we didn't force somebody to fail and then discipline them because they failed.
And really finding out about your team it's great adventure too. And, another thing that happens, and when we come back from a break in a minute here, I want to tackle this issue, which is that generational differences. I've had a lot of that question come up lately. But as we look through that process of leadership, I mean, there are just so many avenues that we go down. If you think of one thing that we talked about last week on the podcast, was taking people for granted. How we do that. Our best employees, sometimes, as leaders, we don't talk to them, because I don't worry about Joey. I don't worry about Joey. Joey does fine. Then one day Joey walks in and says, hey, Bob, I'm resigning. It's my 2-week notice. What? Oh, you're one of my best employees. Well, Joey's life changes. If you don't have that interview, if you're not having that questioning model with them or interacting with them, you don't know the changes that are going on in Joey's life.
Right.
And that's a fascinating part of it. Hey, Jared, we're going to take a break right here, just to get on and move into the next program, which we'll have some fun with in the next couple ones too. This is MotivationU, the podcast, coming to you live from Spurrier's Gridiron Grill at Celebration Point. We'll be right back.
We still hear it. The sound of victory. The joy of being part of something great. And while things may not be the same right now, we haven't gone anywhere. If you bleed orange and blue, then Meldon Law is the firm for you.
Jeffrey, what are you doing?
Well, I'm joining the band, of course. Since Meldon Law is the official law firm partner of the Florida Gators, I want to help.
Dad, we're litigators. Let's stick to helping people in the courtroom.
Well, can we still hang out and jam a little bit? At Meldon Law, we won't back down.
Looking for more reasons to celebrate? We have them here at Celebration Point. Enjoy some of the newest additions to our already celebratory lineup, like Dave & Buster's, Les Macarons, and Prime and Pearl. There's always a reason to celebrate. Join us anytime for any occasion. Celebration Point, where Gators come to celebrate.
MotivationU, the podcast. My name is Bob Ganzak. We're coming to you from a variety of places. Brantford with Matt Thompson. Jared, our producer, is down at the main studios at Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, and I'm coming to you from the home office here inside my house in Valdosta, Georgia. So it's I'm looking outside, and I used to have about 60 azalea plants in my backyard. And I got about 4 left from when I originally planted them back in 2003. Just some freezing and the way the yard has shifted and changed over the years. I only got a couple of those azaleas because Valdosta is known as the Azalea City. And I believe next weekend is the Azalea Fest. And it is so much fun to drive through our neighborhood and see houses that just have hundreds of azaleas around them, and they're in full bloom right now. So very colorful neighborhood here. Talking leadership with Matt Thompson and some of the programs that Dale Carnegie has available in leadership. We already went through one of those, and we spent a lot more time on that than we will the others. But that was developing your leadership potential to stop doing and start leading. Because a lot of us that come from a role and then get elevated to leadership want to keep on doing what we were doing instead of becoming a leader. Now we're going to talk about a program that we have that's available for experienced leaders, which is leadership training for results, unleash the talent in others. And one of the keys that I love about this program is that it starts with the human relations program principles. And as we were talking on break a little bit, that's just one of those things that sometimes when we've been a leader for a long time, we forget.
Yeah, absolutely.
We forget how to build rapport and how to gain willing cooperation. And then what are the foundational day in and day out things that we should be doing to be a strong leader? Why do you think that happens? I mean, why is it important to go back and revisit what got you to where you are?
So I think that we forget because we get so wrapped up in whatever it is we're doing, the numbers, these key performance indicators, all of these things are going. And it seems to me in my career, when I was doing the best was when I was worst at looking at others, right? Because I was like, oh, everything's kind of rolling, And I just want to keep it going. And I get so wrapped up in processes, and I was just talking to my dad today, and I said, on the back of my hard hat, I have 4 words, lead people, manage processes. And I think that we get into that manage processes and forget about leading people. One staple in my career is that I have always picked somebody that I see potential in, and brought them along with me. And they're all in leadership programs or in leadership roles now. But that's usually when we're in turmoil, because I'm like, I got to make people better. I got to make people better. And so, yeah, I think that it's just about remembering that the people are the biggest part of everything that we do. The machines and all of the computer systems and all that can be replaced.
Yeah.
But, and with the flip of a switch, you can make the new computer just as smart as the old one. You can't do that with people. So,
I saw a demonstration at a client yesterday that just fascinated me. And off air, I'll tell you about when you're in Jacksonville. You have to go by there and get that quick tour. There's a piece of equipment there that you would really, really appreciate. I mean, it is phenomenal. Never seen anything or even heard anything like it. Absolutely crazy. You mentioned that that thought process of when we first start leading, then we get down the road and we forget certain things. But in our leadership training for managers, what you have on the back of your helmet is one of the first things we teach in that program, which is not the one we're talking about now, is another leadership program, which is we manage processes and we lead people. And we hear that thrown around so much that you're a manager, you're managing people. No, you're leading people. You're managing the process. If you're a sales manager, you're a sales leader and a sales manager. You're managing the sales process. You're leading the people while you do it. And I really want people to be able to focus on that.
I think the hardest concept sometimes for people to understand is that being a leader is not tied to your title, right?
Anybody can lead. Anybody can lead.
Anybody can lead, and being a leader, and we've talked in the classes about, you're a leader at home. You're a leader, when you're out in the community. So, that no matter their title, whether they're a sales manager or a process manager, they still have the inherent responsibility as just a human to lead, with their heart.
Matt, many years ago when I had 70, 75 employees that were working with me, and I basically ran a number of radio stations. And my mind is thinking right now to certain individuals, and I can see them walking through the building, exactly what you're saying. I looked at them and said, that's a leader. They might not be in the programming, the head of programming, yet they're leading right now, because everybody needs, to be that type of a person that other people look at and say, wow, they're really making things happen, not only in what they're doing, but other people are looking at them and drawing strength from them, So the way we conduct ourselves is, boom, vitally important, Which, going back to this program that we're talking about, is, really, you want to be a role model no matter where you are, especially as a leader. You want to be self-aware, self-directed, self-regulated, have that confidence and continue to develop that confidence, make it stronger and stronger. You want to be accountable. You want to have that honesty, integrity, and be known for that, so that when you do make effective decisions, people trust those. You want to be focused on the other people, like you continue to say. It's about the people, and you want to be that, and effectively communicate with them. And sometimes we say, you've got to communicate with your team. Now, you've got to effectively communicate with your team. A lot of people communicate with their team, and they're communicating the wrong image, or, that is, as we learned with the Moravian study, if your actions and your face and your tone of voice and your words aren't congruent, hey, they're not going to hear what you're saying,
Right.
And then you have to be innovative. You have to be strategic. You have to have that part as far as leadership is concerned, and that's a vitally important part as we grow. But as I was saying, I was starting with those principles. That's just because that's a good lesson for anybody if they've been a CEO. I remember a friend of mine who works at CSX was telling me that I think it was when a new COO came into the company. Usually, one of my favorite companies in the world is CSX. I love working with them, and I hope that I can really continue to work with them in the future. I've done a lot of different things with that organization, and I'm blessed to be able to do that. I won't say what the former COO used to do, or CFO. It was one of the C-suite people. But the new person that came into that position rode the elevator up to that C-suite floor with all the other employees, introduced himself, hey, that had such an impact on my friend who's grown through the company himself. But then not only did he do that, is he showed up in the employee lunchroom and went around and introduced himself and asked if he could sit down and have lunch with him. Is it okay if I sit down with you? That's going back to these principles, building rapport with people. If you don't have a connection with your team in some way, it just boggles my mind.
It does, and one thing that I've heard you say a lot is that, what got you where you're at is not what's going to keep you there, right?
Yeah.
And this is the perfect example of that, that a lot of us, we have a drive in us to get us somewhere, and then we get there and we're like, okay, I'm here, now what? It's a totally different skill set.
Yeah.
It's a completely different skill set, and then to keep it growing, and especially in times like, so in the lumber industry, it's a commodity. So the market tells us what we can charge for it. And when that's down, and that's when you start to see true leaders. That's when you start to see people who have developed their people, who when you do have one mill that has a lot of turnover and another that has none, then you get to see that you get to see things like that. And it's leadership to me is not only fun, right? I love it. I love developing people and all that, but it's the best. Being a leader is the best way to learn to be a better person, because you want to be a better person for other people.
We mentioned right before the break at the bottom of the hour that we were going to talk about something that has come up a lot in a lot of the meetings that I've had lately, and that is generational differences.
Mm-hmm.
I had a meeting yesterday with an individual who, shared with me a new thing that he had heard on NPR, their business program, about one of the things that Gen Z is looking for, which are called bare minimum Mondays. Have you heard about that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. It's, everybody interprets that differently. And, it comes back in many instances as, I want to be able to ease into the week. I don't want you to put a lot of pressure on me early on Monday because I'm recovering from the weekend,
right,
type thing. And take recovering any way you want. The rest or lack of rest, whichever happened, and So stereotyping myself, being a boomer, I look at that as slacking off, right? Personally, I don't.
We're used to Mondays being our busiest day, right?
Yeah,
We're
I
ready
mean,
for fall.
oh man, I always loved Mondays, and I think of the Bangles song, "Manic Mondays," just a manic Monday, right? Yeah, that always. I don't know what the song's all about, but you jump into it, man. Let's tear into it. This is I'm going to set the tone for the week today. That mentality. But we can't always do that. I mean, we're learning a different workplace than we've had in our lifetime, and a lot of it is that generational thing. Now you're a Gen X, right?
Right.
Basically, all right.
Right. Yep.
So a lot of the people in your age group are the parents of many of these individuals that are
Right.
now 20 and 21. What changes have you seen in the business world going from boomers, Gen X, the millennials, and Gen Z, as far as your observations?
So when I went to work for a mill in Alabama, I was 44, and one of the employees there had been at that mill for 45 years, right? So he had been at that mill a year longer than I was alive. And when I found that out, it made me nervous because, in my career, the ones that I had the most issue with were usually the ones that would kind of set in their ways and things like that. And he and I had a really good conversation when I started, and he turned out to be one of my best allies in that company. And in that same company, I had people who this was their first job. They were 18 years old, just, the very first job. So we had the full range of those generations there. What I realized was we spoke to them about one mission, and that at the end of the day, it's about making not only the company, but that was a really small town. It was the only large facility in that town. That town fed off of that mill. So we were able to take that and make it to where, our mission was to make this town stable and make this town better. And when we find a mission like that, whatever it is that you can hit them all with, and that it'll get into all of their hearts, all that generational stuff goes away. Because then they just become somebody who wants to do better for whatever that mission is. The hardest part of dealing with some of the Gen Zs and stuff like that right now is just in the interview process. Getting past and finding out who they are, because one-on-one, I've found, in a lot of cases, it's hard to get them to open up and have a conversation, and especially in an interview process that they feel like it's like I'm asking a question, they answer the question, and I'm not that way. I want a conversation. I want to find out who they are as a person, right? I've had a little bit of trouble with that, so it usually just takes longer, but we eventually get there. They eventually understand that, no, I'm just here for a conversation. I want to find out who you are. All this other stuff I can teach you. I want to know who you are. So
talking leadership with Matt Thompson, who has a long history of leadership in his life and his career in the lumber industry and other manufacturing type of programs, and now does a lot of work with us here at Dale Carnegie Training. And we're talking about those generational differences and how our leadership programs apply to those. One of the things in a study I read last week shows that millennials and Gen Z, those Zoomers, that's what, we got the boomers, now they're the Zoomers, right? Those Zoomers, they want to be trained.
Yes.
That was the number one thing that they're looking for, is training and development when they go to a company. Yet on the other side of the fence, you can read stories and studies that that they're making the workplace better, and
Mhm.
there's a model that they're building. I think your generation started the model, a more flexible place. The millennials really leaped into it, and I think the Zoomers, the Gen Z, they're going to finish it off. I mean, they're going to perfect it. What the future model is, and I think sometime the baby boomers, in my generation, we accepted what the greatest generation handed down to us, and really didn't make any headway into it. I don't think we made a lot of changes in the workplace. We may have modernized it because of the development of technology, but to really say that we made an impact, laws did. I mean, when I started in radio, you could smoke in the studio.
Right.
You walked into many radio studios across the country, it was smoke filled. Some of those voices, those people weren't born with. It was that hoarseness that you get from cigarette smoke. But we've got to remember that each generation is a byproduct of another generation. I asked a question last week, and I've gotten a lot of phone calls of it over the week. I asked the question, you had these people for 18 years in your house. What did you do, and why are you complaining about it now?
Right.
I mean, is that not a fair question to ask?
It is. It is. We see it in the educational side too, where, there's a lot of questioning of the teachers and, with the behavior or the education of the children. And it's the truth is the teacher has that child a few hours a day. The rest of the time it's at home, so that it's not really, that there's the parents, from each generation before. I mean, they are the ones who influence everything. And sometimes it's just because that generation rebelled against what the parents were doing, and some of that's good, some of it's bad. So, but you can really see it. And I don't know that it's always been this evident, but really over the last few generations, it's been really, I mean, you can almost speak to somebody and tell, okay, they were born between here and here,
Yeah.
And maybe the rise in technology, we've made a lot of things so much easier. This right here, having an interview over Zoom, not having to go and drive all the way through Gainesville just to have this interview. I mean, things like that have made things so much easier. And in my opinion, the fight that they're putting on for things like the Mondays and stuff like that, it's not a bad thing. It just we've got to change our way of thinking sometimes, and there's got to be a balance there.
Well, what I love about Skills for Success is we help bridge that gap.
Yes.
I mean, you're seeing that in our classes. The class we have right now. I mean, we help bridge that gap. The analogy I've used is I drive I-75 3 or 4 days a week between Gainesville and Valdosta, and I can tell you every patch of rough road. And I don't usually see all the smooth road. I don't talk about that. There might be 5 patches of rough road that might equal up to 1,000 feet. And there's 120 miles of good road. But how to look at that? And that is somewhat how we many times look at each other in generations. We only look at the potholes in them, and we don't, which might be 1 or 2, and we don't look at the other 99.999% of the good stuff.
Right.
And and that's, let me ask you this question, because we got about 5 minutes left. Just a quick question. When did you get your first computer, or when did you start using a computer? How old were you when that happened?
I think I got my first computer around 19, the real computer, to where like I could get online and or get started with stuff. And maybe a little later than that. But yeah, I was older for compared to what they're having now. I was able to use computers in high school, but they were not real computers compared to what we have now. They were. I remember my dad took a sales job on the road, and he brought a laptop home, and that thing weighed about 40 pounds and had a full-size keyboard that just clipped off the end and a small screen. So yeah, I didn't get into that until later, and then I fell in love with them, of course, and wanted to know more and more about them.
Well, when did the World Wide Web come out?
I'm not really sure.
The history of the World Wide Web. I'm looking it up here on. Looks like 1993. Public use in 1993.
Yeah, that's
okay. The internet was, and then the World Wide Web, where we started searching things in it. So 1993. How old were you in 1993?
18.
I was 38. Okay. So our generation is not, mine and yours are not what is referred to as digital natives. You know what I mean?
Not at all. Right.
The millennials, like my son was born in 83. He's more to the top end of the millennial ages. He's going to be 40 this year. So he was 10 when that came out, when that started, right? The lower end of that, the millennials, which is 1999, 2000, 98, that range, they weren't around, but when they were born, it was already there. So they were immersed in it from day one. Now look at the changes. Look at the changes in the internet between the year 2000 and the year 2023. Think about that, right?
Absolutely amazing. Yeah.
So Gen Z is being raised in a world that we don't understand, and it's there for them. And instead of criticizing it, we need to embrace it and learn about it. From my generation, your generation is pretty good at that. And my generation is the one that, wants to throw the flag on everything,
We're 50-50. The Gen X's are 50-50. We really, so you have that hard line that is just like, this is the way we're going to do it. And then you have people who have embraced it and said, you know what, different doesn't mean good or bad, and I think a lot of times we hear different and we think bad automatically. So,
Matt, I'd like to continue this conversation. Really would. I'm going to have you back in the next couple of weeks. I've got to look at the schedule for the podcast, but I'd like to do this again. And I thank you for being here today, Matt Thompson. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, because this is a great subject to discuss. I want to thank Jared in the studio for helping us with this Zoom call. My name is Bob Ganzak, and coming to you live from Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, this is Motivation U, the podcast.